Well, hello there, traveler. As always, and wherever you're at in this time and space, I hope you are doing well and I hope you are finding peace. If you're in a forest or a clearing, whether it is full of peace or bowling full of insects pollinating all the different uh, flowers and new buds, in either space that you might be, we're going to take the time to just simply sit down, listen, be present, have fun, take the opportunity to ideally let go for a little bit, maybe take on a new perspective or two, and be able just to see what the heck those bees and insects are doing flying around. Are those mayflies? Are those damselflies? What's going on? What are the intricacies of the ecosystem? What are the different aspects that are going on? Then out of nowhere, stumbling out of the forest comes this meandering big being just going plop, 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 plop. But you look up at them and they have almost a glow to them. Facial hair in some liminal stage for all of existence. Biggest smile that you could ask for, though. This being is known as Jared. Jared, how are you doing today?
I am doing quite well, Tall. We talked about before we started recording, a little busy, but life has its ebbs and flows, and there's some good things cooking right now, so I couldn't be happier about that, and just really glad to have another moment to connect with you in this space, and creating a new space here on the book club where hopefully at least a couple times a month we'll get to connect and
Name
move
TBD.
forward. And yeah, TBD. We'll see what works for us.
Placeholder name.
Placeholder name. This is the TBD segment on book club. Tall and Jared. It will have that name until either we mutually agree on a name or we let the public decide what the name will be. So, an intriguing development.
Now, Jared, if you have to take one moment here to reflect and think about an opportunity or a time where you had to be like, huh, I didn't think about it that way.
Yeah.
When's an opportunity that happened in your life?
Like, thinking about, oh, I should have thought about it a different way, but I didn't.
Anytime you change your opinion on anything. When have you actually gone through the process of changing your opinion?
A lot. A lot.
I know you have. I know there's a lot of examples, and I can think of in your life.
Yeah, I mean, political ideologies in a way, religious beliefs in another way. To name two major ones, I think that I've become more receptive to the idea of getting a tattoo, as I just talked to you about before this episode. I used to be
a great example
against it for myself. It's all about personal growth, right? You open your eyes, or I guess they say like open your third eye, that type of thing.
Cross your eyes.
Sometimes you just have to open your mind, not enough to where it falls out. I do believe in that, but it's okay to maybe have judgment in certain circumstances, but then also question yourself, be your own critic, and say, well, why am I being harsh on this, or why do I not agree with this? And then I think in that self inspection, or that introspection, you find your truth, right? And in a lot of instances in life, I feel like questioning myself and challenging myself, and then getting examples from reality and others around me really helps me find my truth, right? And it's not like I've completely become a different person, Tall. I feel in my heart that I've always been this person at heart. I think sometimes we just have to find who that is. And we go through, again, the ebbs and flows of life. Sometimes I think that, especially when you're younger, Tall, you find that you're mostly shaped by your family, your parents, your upbringing. And then when you kind of get away from some of those things, you start to realize who you are, right? You start to take the layers off the onion, and you realize, okay, maybe part of what was my persona before was not really me. Maybe I was just kind of putting up a facade, if you will. So, self-exploration, it's always a good thing. Introspection is a good thing. I think that being critical on yourself in a healthy way can be helpful, at least just to challenge yourself and challenge your ideas, because if you're gonna believe all your own bullshit, then that's not really healthy either. um, so, but you know what's really helped me tall over the years is just surrounding myself with good, healthy connections that really force me to grow, force me to challenge myself, like yourself. And it's why I think we've made such amazing friends over the past near decade now.
No, I appreciate that. A lot of different spaces as you took that answer, and I appreciate the nod to our friendship there too as well.
Hmm.
Have definitely the honor of knowing you for the decade or so now. That we've really gotten the opportunity to really grow on this journey together. I think you talked about some really important things there. First and foremost, just like you're talking about the different influences and different people that you surround yourself with, like going through that different process of like being exposed to new information, right? Um,
Yep.
Going through some potentially some really deep reflection, right? And
Hmm.
I know that typically on the descent we've gone through that quite a bit, and some of the more intense ones we've gone through some of the gender stuff and everything like that, and some of these different even the meditations that we're going through in the Tibetan Book of the Dead series, for instance, right? Those are some
Yep.
pretty heavy meditations when you get into those reflections. And I think then you also touched on something. It's just simply I think you were just talking about just like talking with other people though, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's such a really important one right there. And like how you like really form like that understanding is like we are social creatures and like just taking the time to have those conversations with other people.
Yep.
Now, I think one of the things you alluded to when was one of the last things I want to reference here is the tattoo conversation we had here earlier, and I just want to kind of pry that just a little bit further before we get into this reading, because it's really
Of
kind of
course.
think where the base where I want to get going here is in that conversation. You really talked about um, not any one reason or any one tattoo that you even want, but like this amalgamation of, hey, there's an idea I have.
Yep.
Because of all these things, I have these different meaning. And you also talked about as well, you alluded to my tattoos, you alluded to the different conversations that we've had with different people and these and everything's like that. And, and like how you changed your perspective because because you were very hardline, no tattoo for a very long portion of our
Oh,
friendship.
for a very long time. Yes.
And so I want you to just explain like what was that normalization process looking like? Because I don't think you ever sat down every day and
Yeah.
had a hard introspective moment. Am I going to get a
Oh,
tattoo or not? So talk to me a little bit about the more that casual change that you kind of had just through.
yeah.
It sounds like through realistically exposure.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, I think the change I talked about was some of the more deeply rooted values related to like politics or religion that my family had, challenging those, that did take a lot of introspection, right? That did take a lot of reflection and challenging and challenging myself, challenging them. But yeah, I mean, something like tattoos, like a lot of times I'm not even really thinking about it. I think just kind of in passing, like kind of just the conversation comes up or the idea kind of floats around your mind and you're kind of like, no, shoot it down, dismiss it, right? Because I think I always just had this perception that, like, I'm such a perfectionist. I'm all about like body purity. I can't have anything on myself because I'm gonna like not like it, or it's gonna be something that I'm gonna regret. Like all these things, like the permanence, I think really scared me. Um, and then I don't know, I think just as I got older, I commit to my wife and, we have this beautiful family together. And I think in other ways, being open and vulnerable and getting to share all of my baggage with somebody else, I think really showed me just the value in life of just living a little freer and not as tight. And I think in a way, like, I'm always a perfectionist, I always will be. But I think that I've found a way to like let go of that a little bit in certain instances and being like, you know what, like I don't care. Actually, here's the thing. I just spoke about this with Tasia like maybe a couple weeks ago. I really think I'm starting to turn the corner, Toll, of like caring about what other people think of me. Because I've also always been a people pleaser my whole
Yeah.
life. And I'm like, what does Jared want? Right? Like what would I want to do? I'm like, would my mom like me getting a tattoo? Absolutely not. But I'm not living for my mom. I'm living for me, right? Like, and I know that she would come to understand. It's just one of those things where I saw just in my upbringing and who I was as a person as a kid, being told I was like, just this pure innocent kid. I just thought that there was a hard divide, and it's really not. It's a fucking gradient, right? I mean, it's just not. it doesn't. There's no values conveyed other than just you expressing who you are. And I think once I got over that hurdle and I just kind of put the pieces together slowly over time as I thought about it, I just started to get more curious about it. And then it finally came to the point where I like literally just was talking to Tasia about it, my wife. It was like a year or so ago, and I'm like, I remember we were sitting by the pool at a pool party in our community, and I was there like, "What would you think if I got a tattoo?" And she almost practically fell out of her chair and kind of talked about some of the inspiration and things like that. But again, I'm not still 100% committed to the idea, but like I said, I think it's more likely than not because things are kind of trending in that direction that I think there will come a time in the next couple years where it's just going to feel right and the inspiration's going to finally hit me and I'll probably get it done. But it's just like it's been a growth process. Like I even think even if I can't commit to a tattoo and I don't get one, I still think that my outlook is completely changed on it. Like I don't really see it as black and white anymore as I used to, and I'm trying to live for more myself and all that. So I think that's all part of it. And just kind of slowly, as I check in with myself over time, just noticed that kind of shifted, and distance from my upbringing, my roots helps, and certainly being with someone that allows me to be myself authentically and challenges me as well also helps.
And I think just like what you talked about, that curiosity and that process of change, right, is why I think that literature and like these different like mediums are so important, right? And like it's like when we're talking
Yeah.
about and getting to this series, we're going to be reading, the Akatar series,
Yeah.
as you're aware, and like it's one of Sarah
Hmm.
J. Maas is as an author is one of the currently the most banned authors in the U.S., right? And
Hmm.
this is a there's yeah, there. I'm not saying that there's not adult contents in this book or anything like that. This is one that's going to inherently going to have erotic scenes and everything like that in it. Um, I think that we all are aware without, one of the things that this podcast inherently, it's not that I don't ever get political in this podcast. We all know I'm a raging anarchist and screamed it or anything like that. But we very intentionally try to talk about just the meditations that we're going on, right? And it takes no illusion to be, and especially because how we approach time and place in this podcast, we're not very up to date on the current effects because wherever you're reading and hearing this podcast is wherever you're reading and hearing this podcast, right?
Yep.
The one thing I will say, whenever you're in a situation, right, where there are some really dark forces out there, and I do say dark in the sense of how we colloquialize that, people that want to hurt and restrict the access and ability of others and stuff like that, right? And as we all know, the continued exploitation underneath capitalism and all those different things, right? It's really
Yep.
important to take the time to be able to have these freedom of expressions and to be able to have especially the stories that are told that are in these books, something that is not from the cis normative perspective, right, of a Caucasian white male in charge, large and in charge and stuff like that. Something
Yeah.
that does come from inherently a female perspective, for instance, right?
Yep.
Something that can like help someone find their agency and have those different stories of empowerment and things like that, and through explicitly sexual ways at times, right?
Hmm.
Those are just important stories to be said.
I
In a
agree.
world that has burned literature way too many times and led to continued genocides of continued populations, whether it's Jew, gay, um, Palestinian, or whoever it might be, right?
Yep.
It's just important to
Exactly.
be able to, I think, fundamentally be able to have these stories of expression and everything like that. And that's the little lead in I want to give here. And I don't know if that's exactly the right lead in before we get into basically fairy porn. But we're just going to go ahead now and dive into some fairy porn. So,
All right.
Jared, are you ready?
Yes, I am ready.
I guess I should read the actual cover in proper first. Of Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. #1 New York Times bestselling author. Bloomsbury. I do believe there is a little forward here for Josh. Because you would go under the mountain for me, I love you. Then there is a nice little map of the realm. I am not going to be posting to that because I don't have any copyright to this stuff, and we're not a monetized podcast at all. So if you want to look it up,
Nope.
you're more than welcome to look it up on the internet, y'all. But it has a nice little picture of Prithian and the fairy realms and everything like that. So, and the Moorland differences. So it gives you basically the little layout is it shows you a layout of how all the different courts are, and the little bit of background you need to know for that is the courts are all basically autumnal themed. So there's night court, day court, dawn court, the winter court, the summer court, spring court, and the autumn court, right? And then obviously the human reigns. So all kind of in tune with nature, right? You know, it's got that fairy vibe to it.
Love it.
Chapter 1. The forest had become a labyrinth of snow and ice. I'd been monitoring the perimeters of the thick for an hour, and my vantage point in the crook of the tree branch had turned useless. The gust wind blew thick flurries to sweep away my tracks, but buried along with them any signs of potential quarry. Hunger had brought me farther from my home than I usually risked, but winter was the hard time. The animals had piled in, going deeper into the woods than I could follow, leaving me to pick off stragglers one by one, praying they last until the spring. They hadn't. I wiped my numb fingers over my eyes, brushing away the flakes clinging to my lashes. Here there were no telltale trees stripped of bark to mark the deer's passing. They hadn't yet moved on. They would remain until the bark ran out, then travel north past the wolves' territory, and perhaps into the fairylands of Prithian, where no mortals would dare go, not unless they had a death wish. A shudder skidded down my spine at the thought, and I shoveled it away, focusing on my surroundings, on the task at hand. That was all I could do, all I'd been able to do for years. Focus on surviving the week, the day, the hour ahead. And now, with the snow, I'd be lucky to spot anything, especially from my position up in the tree, scarcely able to see 15 feet ahead. Stifling a groan as my stiff limbs protested at movement, I unstrung my bow before easing off the tree. The icy snow crunched under my fraying boots, and I grounded my teeth. Low visibility, unnecessary noise. I was well on my way to yet another fruitless hunt. Only a few hours of daylight remained. If I didn't leave soon, I'd have to navigate my way home in the dark, and the warnings of the town hunters still rang fresh in my mind. Giant wolves were on the prowl, and in numbers. Not to mention whispers of strange folk spotted in the area, tall and eerie and deadly. Anything but fairies. The hunters had beseeched out our long-forgotten gods, and I had secretly prayed alongside them. In the 8 years we'd been living in our village, 2 journeys from the immortal border of Prithian, we'd been spared an attack. The traveling peddlers sometimes brought stories of a distant border towns left in splinters and bones and ashes. These accounts, once rare enough to be dismissed by the village elders as heresy, had in recent months become commonplace whisperings on every market day. I had risked much in coming so far into the forest. But we finished our last loaf of bread yesterday, and the remainder of our dried meat the day before. Still, I would rather have spent another night with a hungry belly than found myself satisfying the appetite of a wolf or a fairy. Not that there was much for me to feast on. I'd turned gangly by this time of year, and couldn't count the excuse me, and couldn't count the good number of my ribs. Moving as nimbly and quietly as I could between the trees, I pushed a hand against the hollow of my aching stomach. I knew the expression that would be on my 2 elder sisters' faces when I returned to our cottage empty-handed yet again.
Oof.
Yeah, don't want to be continuously starving in the winter. It's not going to be not a good start, Jared.
Pretty
bleak.
No. Yeah, this is famine.
We are starving currently. We're poor, and we're in the winter, next to the fair.
Freezing cold. And danger is imminent.
I mean, it's the woods, right? It's one of my favorite fairy folklore tropes. Period. It's just the danger of the woods, right?
It's so mysterious and just like I almost picture just like a layer of that like blue tone fog and
Blue tone.
like
Oh, you see this as blue tone.
yeah,
Interesting.
blue tone fog, like bluish white and gray hues of gray as well, and just feeling the chill in the air, seeing the frost, seeing the trees naked without any leaves, and just imagining trying to stop yourself from convulsing because you're so cold and you're trying to just survive.
You can count your ribs to keep yourself entertained.
Yeah, and to escape danger. I mean, I mean, for any of you travelers or steeps that may be listening to this book club, if you've ever played Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, may I say Tabantha?
Well,
Abra?
Jared, after a few minutes of careful searching, I crouched in a cluster of snow-heavy brambles. Through the thorns, I had a half-decent view of a clearing and a small brook flowing through it. A few holes in the ice suggested it was frequently used. Hopefully something would come by. Hopefully. I sighed through my nose, digging the tip of my bow into the ground, and I leaned my forehead against the crude curve of the wood. We wouldn't last another week without food, and too many families had already started begging for me to hope for a handout from the wealthier townsfolk. I witnessed firsthand exactly how far their charity went. I eased into a more comfortable position and calmed my breathing, straining to listen to the forest over the wind. The snow fell and fell, dancing and curling like sparkling spindrifts. A white fresh and clean against the brown gray of the world. And despite myself, despite my numb limbs, I quieted that relentless, vicious part of my mind to take in the snow-veiled woods. Once it had been second nature to savor the contrast of new grass against dark-tilled soil, or an amethyst brooch nestled in the folds of an emerald silk. Once I dreamed and breathed and thought in color and light and shape. Sometimes I would even indulge in vision and day when my sisters were married and it was only me and father, with enough food to go around, enough money to buy some paint, and enough time to put those colors and shapes down on paper or canvas or cottage walls. Not likely to happen anytime soon. Perhaps ever. So I was left with moments like this, admiring to the glint of pale winter light on snow. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done it. Bothered to notice anything lovely or interesting. Stolen hours in a decrepit barn with Isaac Hale didn't count. Those times were hungry and empty, sometimes cruel, but never lonely. The howling wind calmed into a soft singing. The snow fell lazily now, in a big, fat clumps that gathered along every nook and bump of the trees. Mesmerizing. The lethal, gently beauty of the snow. I'd soon have to return to the muddy, frozen roads of the village, to the cramped heat of our cottage. Some small, fragmented part of me recoiled at the thought. Bushes rustled along across the clearing. Drawing my bow was a matter of instinct. I peered through the thorns, and my breath caught. Less than 30 paces away stood a small doe, not yet scrawny from winter, but perhaps desperate enough to wrench a bark from the tree in the clearing. A deer like that could feed my entire family for a week or more. My mouth watered, quiet as the wind hissed through the dead leaves. I took aim. She continued tearing off strips of bark, chewing slowly, utterly unaware that her death waited yards away. I could dry half the meat, and we could immediately eat the rest stews, pies. Her skin could be sold, or perhaps turned into clothing for one of us. I needed new boots, but Elaine needed a new cloak. And Nesta was prone to crave anything someone else possessed. My fingertips trembled. So much food. Such salvation. I took steadying breath, double-checking my aim. but there was a pair of golden eyes shifting from the bush adjacent to mine. The forest went silent. The wind died. Even the snow paused. We mortals no longer kept gods to worship, but if I had known their lost names, I would have prayed to them all of them. Concealed in the thicket, the wolf inched closer, its gaze set to the oblivious doe. He was enormous, the size of a pony. Though I had been warned about their presence, my mouth turned bone dry. But worse than his size was his unnatural stealth. Even as he inched closer in the bush, he remained unheard, unspotted by the doe. No animal that massive could be so quiet. But he was no ordinary animal. If he was from Prithian origin, if he was somehow a fairy, then being eaten was the least of my concerns. If he was a fairy, I should be running. Yeah, maybe it would be my favor to the world, to my village, to me, to kill him while I remained undetected. Putting an arrow through his eye would be no burden. But despite his size, he looked like a wolf, moved like a wolf. Animal. I reassured myself. Just an animal. I didn't let myself consider the alternative. Not when I need my head clear, my breathing steady. I had a hunting knife, 3 arrows. The first 2 were ordinary arrows, simple and efficient, and they likely no more than a bee sting to a wolf that size. But the 3rd arrow, the longest and the heaviest one, I bought that from a traveling peddler during a summer when we'd had enough coppers for extra luxuries. An arrow carved from the mountain ash, armed with an iron head. From song sung to us as lullabies over our cradles, we all knew from infancy that fairies hated iron. But it was the ash wood that made them their more immortal healing magic falter long enough for a human to make a killing blow. Or so legend and the rumor claimed. The only proof we had of the ash effectiveness was its sheer rarity. I'd seen drawings of the trees, but never one with my own eyes. Not after the High Fae had burned them all long ago. So few remained. Most of them small and sickly, and hidden by the nobility within high-walled groves. I'd spent weeks after my churches debating whether that overpriced bit of wood had been a waste of money or a fake. And for 3 years, the ash arrow had sat unused in my quiver. Now I drew it, keeping my movements minimal, effective, anything to avoid that monstrous wolf looking in my direction. The arrow was long and heavy enough to inflict damage, possibly kill him. If I aimed right, my chest became so tight it ached. And in that moment, I realized that my life boiled down to one question. Was the wolf alone?
Who knows?
Well, we'll find out. I mean, because wolves typically are in packs, right?
I mean, typically, right? I would expect it, unless it's a fairy.
We'll find out.
Do fairies come in packs? I don't know.
I gripped my bow and drew the string back farther back. I was in decent shot, but I've never faced a wolf. I thought it made me lucky, even blessed, but now I didn't know where to hit it or how fast they moved. I couldn't afford to miss, not when I only had 1 ash arrow. And if it was a deed in fairy's heart pounding under that fur, then God's riddance. Good riddance, after all their kindness done to us. I wouldn't risk this one later creeping into our village to slaughter and maim and torment. Let him die here and now, and I'd be glad to end him. The wolf crept closer, and a twig snapped beneath one of his paws. Each of them bigger than my hand. The doe went rigid. She glanced to either side, ears straining towards the gray sky. With the wolf's downwind position, she couldn't see him or smell him. his head lowered and his massive silver body, so perfectly blended into the snow and shadows, sank onto his haunches. The doe was still, staring in the wrong direction. I glanced from the doe to the wolf and back again. At least he was alone. At least I'd been spared that much. But if the wolf scared the doe off, I was left with nothing but a starving, oversized wolf, possibly a fairy, looking for the next best meal. And if I killed her, destroying precious moments of hide and fat. And if he killed her, destroying precious amounts of hide and fat. If I had judged wrongly, my life wasn't the only one that would be lost. But my life had been reduced to nothing but risks these past 8 years. That I'd been hunting in the woods. And I'd been picked correctly most of the time. Most of the time.
I mean, that's good enough for me.
Good enough for me. The wolf shot from the brush in a flash of gray and white and black, his yellow fangs gleaming. He was even more gargantuan in the open. A marvel of muscle and speed and brute strength. The doe didn't stand a chance. I fired the ash arrow before he destroyed much else of her. The arrow found its mark in his side, and I could have sworn the ground itself shuddered. He barked in pain, releasing the doe's neck as his blood sprayed onto the snow, so ruby bright. He whirled towards me, those yellow eyes wide, hackles raised. His low growl reverberated in the empty pit of my stomach as I surged to my feet, snow churning around me, another arrow drawn. But the wolf merely looked at me, his maw stained with blood, my ash arrow protruding so vulgarly from his side. The snow began falling again. He looked, and with some sort of awareness and surprise that made me fire the second arrow, just in case the intelligence was the immortal, wicked of sort. He didn't try to dodge the arrow as it went clean through his wide yellow eye. He collapsed to the ground. Color and darkness swirled, eddying in my vision, mixing with the snow. His legs were twitching as low whining sliced through the wind. Impossible. He should be dead, not dying. The arrow was through his eye, almost to the goose fletching. But wolf or fairy, it didn't matter. Not with that ash arrow buried in his side. He'd be dead soon enough. Still, my hand shook as I brushed off the snow and edged closer, still keeping a good distance. Blood gushed from the wounds I'd given him, staining the snow crimson. He pawed at the ground, his breathing already slowing. Was he in much pain, or was his whimper just an attempt to shove death away? I wasn't sure. I wanted to know. The snow swirled around us. I stared at him until that coat of charcoal and obsidian and ivory ceased rising and falling. Wolf. Definitely just a wolf, despite its size. The tightness in my chest eased as I loosed a sigh, my breath clouding the front of me. At least the ash arrow had proved itself to be lethal, regardless of who or what it took down. A rapid examination of the doe told me I could carry only one animal, and even if that would be a struggle. But it was a shame to leave the wolf. Though it wasted precious minutes during which any predator could smell the fresh blood, I skinned him and cleaned my arrows the best as I could. If anything, it warmed my hands. I wrapped the bloody side of his pelt around the doe's death wound before I hoisted her across my shoulders. It was several miles back to our cottage, and I didn't need a trail of blood leading every animal with fangs and claws straight to me. Grunting against the weight, I grasped the legs of the deer and spared a final glance at the steaming carcass of the wolf. He remained golden-eyed, stared at the snow-heavy skies for a moment. I wish I had it in me to feel remorse for the dead thing. But this was the forest, and it was winter. Chapter 2.
Brutal.
Well, Jared,
I think that is a wonderful way to kick things off with the series.
I agree. How do you think the first episode?
what a thrilling introduction, if I do say so myself.
I guess I should say chapter,
Filled
not
with
episode.
imagery.
Sorry.
Yeah. Chapter 1, I mean, what imagery, right? I mean, that's just picturesque. I felt like I was in her shoes throughout that whole chapter. And I mean, just the internal conflict of wolf versus fairy. I thought it was written very well because it was done so in a way that obviously we found out it was just a wolf, but at one point it's like, is it a wolf? Because the way that she was describing this being, it made it sound like it could have been almost supernatural in a way, which kind of heightened my sense of uncertainty. I was like, okay, she's just got to contend with a wolf, and I'm like, oh wait, hang on, could this be a fairy in disguise? Like, that was pretty thrilling, and the fact that that was her obstacle to getting food for her family, like, that was pretty neat to have to overcome that. And the fact that she didn't even feel any remorse at the end because, like, it's winter and it's the forest. Like, bravo. I mean, it's like, it's literally the circle of life. It's the circle of life. Like, eat or be eaten, right? It's the predator and the prey game. So it's like survival of the fittest. I thought it was really neat. And I also love just the visuals in my mind that I got of the snow and the animal and the arrow, like describing the ashwood and the iron. Again, lots of vivid imagery. And I feel cold. I feel cold tall, just like,
Well, you need to
almost
be feeling
picturing
cold where you're
myself
at right now.
Oh yeah. I'll take it. What did you think? What did you make of that first chapter?
And no, I think that what caught me the same as the first time through, I think, was just how brutal the first chapter is, right? It's this dark world of survival, and I'm like, that's what I like. I think that when it comes to a lot of my high fantasy and stuff I like, and that was my end, right? It wasn't necessarily what was to come later, or it wasn't talking about even fairies. I just truly like the idea of it being a high fantasy world with these mythical creatures, and we'll get into some of the different creatures and everything that comes later because I'm a big ass nerd and everything like that. But just as someone who's I've never, I understand what it's like to struggle with money, right? And it's no struggle to be homeless at times too, and everything like that. And to go through just that, no, I don't know where my next food comes from. It's something I'm very grateful that I haven't necessarily had the recent trust of and everything like that. Food insecurity sucks though, right? And
Yep.
I think we live in a time of luxury when food insecurity, luckily for the most part, is not hunter-gatherer based. And to have to be in this position where you have to go out and actually support not just you but your family, and if I don't get this hunt, it's not going to be, I'm not going to eat, my family's going to starve, and we're out of food, and then have to deal with oh fuck, there's this other apex predator right here dealing with this thing, right, this wolf, right, this fucking thing.
Mhm.
And mainly she gets a nice coat out of it, right? That's
Yeah.
that's the steam of it, right?
It's a
But
baller
no,
move right there.
no, I know,
Baller move.
and I know it is. It's oh, I just killed this apex predator, and now I take your skin off of you too. So, yeah,
Yeah.
then we'll see if that's just it's a baller move, like you were talking about, Jared.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, go ahead.
I do have something to add too. I feel like the whole suspense that the author created with wolf versus fairy, I think that was actually an important aspect because it shows the heightened level of threat in that very moment. To even consider this as being a supernatural being,
Yeah.
it almost feels like a metaphor in a way. Like this is such a almost insurmountable obstacle for me to overcome, and for her to do it just shows again how powerful of a moment that was. And
Hey,
then you
you
have
need to
that
survive.
relief and attention. Yeah, you got to survive. So I loved chapter 1. It was great. Soaking it all in right now, and I can't wait until next time when we get into chapter 2 and beyond.
I look forward to being able to get into chapter 2 wherever it might bring us doing this thing. Jared, thank you very much for joining us here on whatever this ends up being called, whatever it is. This has been an absolute joy to have you. Traveler, wherever
Likewise.
you might be at, I hope you are able to see some chickens in the near future. I think chickens are pretty cool. I think they're wonderful little
Yeah.
creatures, and I hope you get to see some few chickens
Very
in the near
cool.
future. But as always, please, try to bring priests to the realms. Don't be a dick. And as always, you are loved.
As always.